Hi, I'm James Paterson, also known as Presstube. I'm a Montreal-based digital artist.
Hi, my name is Casey Austin. I also go by bzor, and I'm a creative technologist in Asheville, North Carolina.
So first, I'd love to hear a bit about your background, both as artists and as collaborators. You were mentioning a little bit before about how you met, but just would love to hear just a little bit more from each of you.
Okay, yeah. I won't get too deep into it, but I went to school at Arizona State University. I studied under Muriel Magenta's ISA. She had a little sub-institute within ASU that I studied at and learned. This is in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. And then after that, I was going to go into movies, but I ended up doing Flash work. And I created a small website called bzor T12. This is like a Flash site that showcased little artificial life experiments. And that kind of caught the eye of the Flash community, and I got involved with the different conferences and ended up at a company called WDDG in New York, which was like a big Flash interactive studio. And we did loads of Flash sites and different advertising agency jobs. And then I moved to LA in the mid 2000s, shifted to Unity and WebGL, and did some VR work. That got into Sundance, and then from there moved to Asheville and kind of got away from the cities and doing contract work for ads. And I kind of rebooted my old bzor kind of style of experimentation, and kind of reunited with James. We were friends in the early 2000s and started doing some more artistic work and more personal work. And we did a couple FX hash. We did an FX hash project that was really fun, and kind of trying to reboot my personal artwork lately and get into more WebGL and Unity experiments just for myself rather than working for clients. James?
Yeah, I guess maybe the place to start for me is maybe about age 12. I really recognized that drawing was going to be the thing for me. Like I kind of like dedicated myself to drawing at that age and just started drawing every day. And then around 17, I got into animation through Flash as well, because I sort of discovered the web as a teenager, and started publishing my drawings, bringing my drawings to life using Flash, animating them and putting them online. And then really shortly after that, because of Flash, also got into code. So like started drawing at 12, got into animation and code in my late teens, and then I've been just doing, got really heavily into code in my 20s, using that as a primary artistic medium. And really, for me, it's like the most interesting thing is taking this core of drawing, which is like directly linked to my imagination, and then like mixing that as finely as I can with experimental animation and experimental code, and smushing those three things together and kind of just finding areas to play in there. And then I think where Casey and I really overlap a lot is tool building as a creative medium. Like you come up for any given project, you design an entire system for that project. And in our case, it's often like when we're collaborating and when I'm working on my own too, it's often like creating a system, and then that system is finely tuned to kind of handshake or link up with traditional assets. So a drawing in a certain format or style, or animation that fits a certain kind of technical handshake, or or sculptures. That the RFX hash project you can see as a sculpture-based project, like sculptures that fit that kind of technological handshake or systemic handshake. And then it becomes like a feedback loop between tool building and the creation of traditional assets and working in traditional mediums. And when it's on my own, then that's the feedback loop within my own process. And when I'm working with KC, it's the same kind of feedback loop, from traditional to technical, but also going back and forth across, multiple people, and letting our just different minds and imaginations weave together that way. And so, yeah, that's sort of without any real timeline. That's what I'm all about and what my work's all about. And then, Casey and I met in early 2000s and then started collaborating in 2017. And so we've done some commercial work together, but really interesting stuff. Like we've done some ID work for a biotech company that codes cells, codes organic material. Like we usually working, if we're going to work in commercial stuff together, it's like really fringe, fun, cool commercial gigs. But mainly my life has just been purely fine art for the past quite a while now.
That's fantastic. Thank you both so much for for your background. It's funny, I'm reading a book right now called The Forge and the Crucible by Mircea Eliade, and he talks all about this sociological analysis of how alchemy was the origin of chemistry, and the whole first half of the book is about how tool building is really close to godliness. Like it actually like serves the gods to build tools and to kind of create these new art forms that compress time and space in a way that wouldn't otherwise. So anyway, we could nerd out about that later.
It's like the difference between painting a painting and then there's like painting a painting and then you make your own paints. And there's like painting a painting and you make your own paints and you made your own paintbrush. And then it's like painting and it's like you invented an entire artistic medium and then you made art through that. And that's kind of where we're at now, which is like basically reinvent your own artistic medium from scratch whenever you want.
Exactly. And so this is very generative art based, this sort of like mentality and this sort of practice. How did you arrive at generative art after you had started collaborating, or did you start collaborating with generative art? I'm curious about sort of how you began your practice together.
In my work, I've worked with, bigger agencies and production houses like PsyOp, and a lot of that ends up being pipeline development. So I'll be taking, a series of assets that are formatted in some way and sending them through this long sort of pipeline that ends up being, shooting things out for different parts of the pipeline and creating different formats and everything. So that kind of mentality of creating pipelines kind of helps with the generative art thing, because it's a very similar sort of workflow and mentality there. But doing it on an artistic, in an artistic way with a collaboration with one other person is like a totally different thing, and it's much more. It's really fun, and then there's no clients. You can just kind of go back and forth. There's the deadlines. Kind of you can just rip off each other and come up with, like, I will come up with something, and then James will use the system in ways that I would have never guessed, and then he'll send things back and I'll be like, wow, that would never have done that. So then I'll add features to kind of help that sort of break off on a pathway going this way. And, the project can take these right angle turns and we can do whatever we want. It's really fun.
Yeah, in my case, pretty soon after getting into animation and code in the late 90s, early 2000s, I started crossing over into the almost game-like territory, like art where art and games kind of mesh, and that instantly takes you into a generative paradigm. You're building, you're just like feeding these systems assets, and those assets are being controlled and put together by the code, by the system. And had some early, very early, like 2001, had some shows that were taking all of my sketchbook drawings, like scanned like hundreds of, thousands of drawings, all ripped out of my sketchbooks and put into these libraries, and then would recombinate them into, what looked like generative projects that I could probably release now. And so I was doing that a while ago. And then the last few years, generative art just like lit on fire when there was finally the chance to have the medium stand on its own for once. Like before that, it was always like generative art, and then it would have to find its way back to the traditional art markets. It would be like, reproductions of generative art in one way or another, videos or images. And so over the past few years, to have generative art finally have a life of its own, where it can live in its native tongue as the final product, has been really inspiring, and it really like inspired me to just get back into, get way more back into it. I sort of never left it, but it definitely like lit a fire under my butt to revisit, like if I wanted to get seriously back into generative art now, what would that look like after all these years? So
yeah, it's funny, we were doing this, like all this kind of stuff in Flash back in the day, but the capabilities were tiny, and then we all kind of went off and had these professional careers, and then have these skill sets now and this technology and the GPUs and everything is so much more advanced. And then coming back to it now, for me, it's like this huge tool set that we can use with the same ideas from 20 years ago. It's nice.
It's so interesting because it really seems like for the first, like crypto kind of gives the ability for generative art to be transacted in a way that does give it the sort of, that holds space for it, really, and that does allow it to be seen as its own art form and not just as something that's kind of off to the side or has to be like derivative or somehow like paired to something else. So it's really cool that your career's kind of started there and then like kind of moved away and now you're back. Thank you for giving the background on your on both your practices and your collaborative style. And I just want to point out too, Casey, that I think that's the beauty of collaboration, right? That like you can make something and then someone else has an idea, and then what you have in the end is something that neither of you would have done on your own. But it's really this like kind of third thing that comes from collaboration.
Yeah, so 1 + 1 = 3. When it goes well, when you love working with the person, it's really, really amazing.
Yeah, I think finding the right collaboration, the right people, and then getting that flow, that feedback loop, and where it's like you get obsessed and you can't think about anything else.
And I think it helps if you're interested in the same things. Like Casey and I definitely have like major sort of crossover Venn diagram of interests when it comes to like fascination with phenomenological, firsthand experience of consciousness and consciousness research and psychedelics and meditation and all that. And so to be able to touch on themes that we both, read about and think about all the time and talk about when we're not, sometimes when we're working, like we just go off on these massive tangents and just be talking about the stuff we're interested in, and then to be able to make work where it like directly reflects, what we find most fascinating.
Very similar libraries.
I really like that. And that's a great way to segue into the Truth exhibition, I think, which kind of, I think, touches on a lot of these different practices of, well, for me at least, there's sort of this like vision of everything as one, right? Which to me is a very kind of psychedelic approach to seeing the world. And so I'm curious, when Adam approached you for the show, what really resonated about the curatorial vision of it? And I'm happy to read a little blurb if that helps kind of jog memory or just kind of ground us in some way. So
please do. I mean, I think we both were pretty, it's so fresh in our mind that we are very fresh, but I think it'd be great for you to read the blurb and just set the tone.
Fantastic. So from the curatorial statement, the show is about exploring our perception of scale, from the microscopic to the cosmic, where artists are using various abstract forms to look at the fibers of our universe, either obscuring or uniting the differences between the micro and the macro, and inviting a perceived sameness across the scales. So for me, that's quite meditative and like very much an expanded sort of worldview in this kind of 1 + 1 = 3 kind of mentality, which it sounds like the both of you have quite a bit of. So curious about how that resonates with you, either in the beginning and then how it's kind of transformed your piece and how you think about it.
The kind of redux in our minds was sort of like the self-similarity or the spiritual self-similarity in nature across different scales and contexts. And I think like the immediate response to thinking about that, for me at least, was like atom, molecule, cell, creature, planet, solar system, galaxy. Like you see those, or you see like hurricane and toilet bowl swirl or something, that kind of that self-similarity across nature. So that was sort of the knee-jerk first impression, and also, like you said before, like a very psychedelic insight, like when you feel that self-similarity across all scales of nature, or that complete unification. But then Casey and I came at the concept more obliquely from from the perspective of how that could relate to language, and like kind of cross-cutting that self-similarity through the structure of information in nature, all across nature. And we were thinking about language as something that is almost something more grown, that grows or emerges out of nature rather than something that's invented. And so it's like this sort of extrusion that's coming out of nature rather than like people sitting around a table and like figuring it out. And in our artist statement, like one of the quotes is like thinking about language more like hair or fingernails than like a hammer or a bicycle. And some of the references that we brought, like we assembled these references at the beginning to try and capture this, like this crosscut through all of nature as we saw it. And the references were Beethoven's labored over manuscripts. He has these really there's like tons of revisions and reworking and these like madness on the page of Beethoven's manuscripts, but it's still in the structure of music. It's notation, it's encoding. Then it was Sumerian clay tablets, like the earliest like cuneiform tablets, which is where the name of our piece cuneiform came from. Cy Twombly's emotional mark making, which when you look at it right next to Beethoven's manuscripts, it's like Beethoven's manuscript could be a Cy Twombly painting, basically. Oscillated lizard skin, which is like these lizards that have like eye patterns on their scales, that those eye patterns evolve and transition as the lizard grows over their life. The eyes transform into different shapes and obviously like communicate to the rest of the wilderness, don't eat me or something or I'll eat you or whatever they say to the rest. And then next reference was Wolfram's obsession with cellular automata. So essentially just like cellular automata as an idea and just the beauty that kind of erupts out of that whole. And it's also kind of a well-trodden path for generative art too. So an interesting thing to make a statement there. And finally, octopus chromatophores, and just seeing how the skin of an octopus transmits information and structures information. And so all those references kind of smushing together. Casey, James, whatever they make, go like try to like find the crossover, or like where all that meets, and that's what cuneiform is to us. That's what the theme. That was our take on the theme, also.
Casey, did you want to add anything?
I think that pretty much nailed it. Yeah, it was. We always kind of do that. We do these kind of blue sky brainstorming sessions where it's like a growth sort of L system of ideas. We're constantly branching out, and like some of the branches might be a little out there, but everything kind of has a feeling to it. And yeah, once this kind of ball started rolling on this, it just kind of collected all of these different things, and the octopus's skin as language, and everything just kind of fit together, and then trying to pull in, and then coming back to creating some sort of system, something that can consume James's hand-drawn elements, and then structure it in some way that relates to the whole, was kind of the next step after that.
I'm curious, how did you come to the name Cuneiform then for the final series?
So cuneiform is the name of the oldest expressions of written language in humanity are these clay tablets, where people would smush marks into clay tablets and then they would bake them, and you'd have these tablets, and cuneiform is the name of that writing process. And there was I think there's many different dialects and different cultures that have used cuneiform as their written slate, and they look really incredible. There's really fascinating looking forms of writing, really ancient, and they're very real crossover Beethoven, Cy Twombly, like Beethoven, Cy Twombly, ancient language smushed into a clay tablet.
Thank you. And let's talk now about the aesthetic. So I'm always like, in generative art, how did you arrive at this system? You are bringing in all of these different components and all these different elements with such a not only historical context, but like a primal context, like a deep kind of like a deep history. And so how does the aesthetic that you've chosen basically, and how does the system kind of output that, but where did those choices come in?
Casey, I'll go for it, because I mean, I think there's different facets to the answer to that, but I know you've got some good insights there.
Well, we love the idea of the cellular automata as sort of the underlying fabric that we can hang sort of James's drawings onto. Like that was kind of our initial concept, like, because there's nothing more kind of structural than these cellular automata, and there's such a wide variety of patterns and shapes, and they all have this sort of like it kind of hits you in that sort of primal way of structure and meaning, but you don't know what it is. And then we knew that was like the direction we wanted to go. But then after that, it's like, how can we sort of hang James's drawings on it in a way that isn't just, you know, the cellular automata itself, like not just color and form just slapped on each state of it so it looks exactly the same. Like, how can we kind of layer things over top of it, and then
like break out, like use cellular automata as a starting point, but then like see if we can break out of it in an organic way that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, because it is kind of a well-trodden road, especially in the generative art thing. So it's like, how do we like use it as the underlying fabric, but then kind of take it in a different direction? And so I started out with just creating the cellular automata, and then, you know, putting James's drawings on it in different ways. But then after James started drawing, it kind of different techniques of making it different just sort of flowed out of that. And James tried a lot of different assets to begin with, like the Cy Twombly kind of dark, erratic shapes, and then big splotchy things, and then little sigil looking things. And we kind of, and a lot of them didn't work, but then all of a sudden like one or two would start to come together, and then we would just take that path.
I think that's one of the most interesting things about straddling like traditional and contemporary digital or technical art making processes, is like finding resonance between those two, between like really handmade, like really emotional, really emotive, raw art making processes, and then really systematic processes, and just finding, like, it takes some experimentation on both sides to try and triangulate yourself to something that's really resonating, and then exploiting, like kind of then like take all the experiments, throw them away, refocus on just this little patch where there's something that's working, you know, explode that into all new area of exploration on the traditional side, and then all new area of exploration on the technical side, and go again and kind of refocus and expand out from that resonant point. And so that's definitely that formula or that way of working seems to work well, and that definitely was a pattern we followed with this. And I think with cellular automata has two things that were really interesting in relation to this, to the show's theme, and to our kind of subset of the theme, which is that for those who don't know, like, it's like these very simple mathematical rules that then these patterns just pour out of these simple rules, these beautiful visual patterns, and there's just a huge variety, and they look a lot like patterns in nature that you see everywhere, but they have a structure that looks almost as if there's a communication hidden in these patterns. It looks like it's trying to tell you something, or that you could potentially like decrypt it and it would give you a message. Like, it has these kinds of feelings to it sometimes. It has a lot of structural, like triangular, almost architectural aesthetics that come into it. And so it really had that. It really feels like out of the box, it has like these reflection of the structure of information or language, and then the idea of hinging like a whole new set of visual languages on top of that to bring out some of the rest of our theme, like to create it so it's like, you know, hair and growth and stuff tangling out of this like really structured but still organic substructure. and then also laying on like Casey mentioned, like developed this sort of sigil language, or like kind of symbolic form of drawing that I've been working with for a long time, and bringing that in and overlaying that on top of it, so that it's sort of like the structure of cellular automata with like a fine layer of almost like another language that's being overlaid on top of that.
The cellular automata stuff's like the thing I've been messing with the most over the years, like for 20 years, and it's just the most amazing whole concept, and it's something you can get obsessed with. It's just, you have a row of cells, it's just one row, and you just make one black in the middle, and then the next state, every cell looks at its neighbor, and by a simple rule, it says, you know, if one cell is active on the left, turn black. If it's not, turn white, stuff like that. So there's a rule for every option of its neighbors. And just from one cell at the top, the whole thing just creates this amazingly complicated pattern. And so if you look at some of the works that have like a sort of triangular shape at the top, that's because it just originated from one cell that's colored and the rest are blank. And then the whole thing kind of creates this amazing pattern that goes down. And the ones that are, you know, full at the top start with a random selection at the top, and then it just creates. And the different rules that you choose can be randomized and then create completely different patterns. So we just kind of created the system where you can pick all the, you can kind of flip through the rules quickly, boom, 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 and then pick a pattern you like. And then we had a bunch of sliders and ways to load his assets in, and can sort of dial in all these different ways that those get applied.
So cellular automata, does it, forgive me if this is an ignorant question, but it must occur naturally, right? Like it occurs in nature? Where have we observed this?
You can see something like it on seashells. Yeah, it does. There's a lot of these sort of computational ideas that are reflected in nature, like reaction diffusion. You'll see a lot of these, and it's mostly cells that are affected by their neighbors. And when you have that, like one cell looking at its neighbor all across the whole thing, you can get really complex patterns and everything. So probably the closest thing to these one-dimensional cellular automata things would be some of the seashells, but they're a little messier because it's biology. But
I saw something the other day. It's not a one-to-one fit, but I don't know how my son and I got onto it, but we got onto what happens if you get struck by lightning. We were like, how many people survive if you get struck by lightning? That was where we sort of started with it. And then we got into looking at what it looks like when you get struck by lightning, and people get these incredible, like fern-shaped burns that look like you couldn't pay to get a tattoo that looks that cool. Like if you ever go look up lightning strike burns, they're like basically like these incredible like blossoming tree scars that people get. And I was like, that looks like that looks like cellular automata. so they do emerge in nature. If you just get hit by lightning, then you can get a scarification tattoo. It looks like it.
You have a great book that's The Algorithmic Beauty of Seashells. And,
okay.
Yeah.
I'll be sure to check that out. But just for the record, we are not condoning getting struck by lightning, nor did we suggest that you try to do so.
9 out of 10 people survive. I wouldn't have thought so. Yeah, you've got your two paths. You've got your Casey's nice book about seashells, and then my really not nice Google image search where you're going to have to click like adult settings unlock. Why I'm looking at that with my kids, I don't know, but anyway.
Well, thank you. That is incredible context for the piece. I can't wait to go revisit the work. Now that I know all of this, it's really fascinating. And I guess, is there anything else that you want to add about the work, or about what you think people might want to know, or context that you think might supplement all of the amazing things you've just unlocked?
Anything on your mind, Casey? I think we summed it up pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Can't really
there's
think of
little
anything else.
details about, but I think it's just, I think the meat of it is in the concept and kind of our way of collaborating, how much fun that is,
Yeah.
That feedback loop, I think, and just trying to do these projects where it both grabs us. The concept is something that we're both really into, and we can, lights this kind of fire that we go back and forth on.
Yeah, I think also maybe just seeing how all the other artworks, like when we finally only just like this morning really started to see it all coming together into curated sets, and seeing how everybody else, how the other artists approach the concept, and how fascinating it is to see those side by side. And that's such a great thing about what you guys are doing at Feral File, to see like just it's almost like the same feedback loop that we're talking about between Casey and I's system to traditional art, or within my own process system to traditional art. But in this case, like the curator can come up with a concept and a theme, and almost like run multiple artists through a theme and have the same kind of feedback loop going on. And then it also makes a lot of sense for Adam's theme for the show, like this was self-similarity in nature, and then to see that exhibiting itself through the lens of these different artists, like who they're all interpreting that theme, and then it's like that super meta layer of like, then you can see the self-similarity between the artists and their expressions. So that's been fascinating.
Yeah, really cool. It's almost like emergent coordination just by us going across off on our own little paths and then coming together and forming it. It's really cool.
Absolutely. Even like seeing the curated sets, it's like they start in the middle and then like move outwards. Like some of them are just like blossom as he's curated the sets all together. It's really an extraordinary exhibition. And I'm so happy that you're all part of it, and that this project, that the series is included. It's so deep and so rich. And I just really want to thank you both. We're approaching time. So do you have any questions for me, or questions for each other that you want to ask? Or...
Casey, how are you today? Elisabeth, how are you today?
I am well, thank you.